All right, everybody, get comfortable. This is a strange story, since you're not going to believe the lengths some people will go simply to save. And I'm not kidding about 3 minutes of their so-called valuable time. Just leave a comment and let me know where you're viewing from. Thanks one certain HOA Karen. I may unofficially hold the record for the most often and viciously demolished fence in my entire county, perhaps even the state. Let's call her Brenda. Her real name most likely exudes the same vitality of someone constantly seeking to talk to a manager. Brenda seemed to believe that my property line was more of a casual recommendation than a legal limit, with her constant frown and an SUV the size of a baby rhino fuel guzzler. It started gently, that is, as modest as a 2-ton car can be when it is treating your lawn as an off-ramp still. It was not subtle for very long. Things got out of hand rapidly. And that's when things got very cinematic, after her campaign of vehicle destruction finally ran against an actual wall. Get ready even if you believe you have heard HOA horror stories before. It all began roughly 2 years after I settled into what I considered to be my ideal suburban paradise, tucked at the end of a quiet, green cul-de-sac. But if they were truly gunning it, the way our streets were set up sliced roughly 2 minutes and 45 seconds off the path for anyone arriving from the main road. Sure, a shortcut, but a nasty one. A lovely 4-foot picket fence defined my limit. It was not a fortification, but only a small act of privacy. Enough to discourage wandering canines, perhaps a toddler. Not a driven Karen under time pressure. When it first started, I discovered some faint tire marks and some broken pickets. I thought it was an accident, perhaps a youngster on a bike or someone parking badly. I sighed as I corrected it. It happened once more 1 week later. This time the damage was more severe. A whole panel leaned as it had taken a punch, and the tire prints were more deliberate. That's when Mr. Henderson, my lovely elderly neighbor with the prize roses, wandered over and said, "That's Brenda again." He had noticed her terrible black SUV, cutting like she owned the road. She lived nowhere on our street, but she was well known in the HOA, a self-appointed enforcer of arbitrary policies. Seeing her in meetings, teaching everyone about mailbox colors or lawn lengths, as though she were running a guarded kingdom, I chose to go right up to her. One Saturday I walked over and rang her doorbell. She responded in designer athleisure apparel, most obviously more status symbol than workout gear. Her tone of theatrical inconvenience questioned what I wanted. I started by introducing myself as her Elm Street neighbor. She remembered me barely. "The one with the gnomes," she sneered. For record's sake, I had one gnome, rather nicely hidden under a shrub. I gently brought up the ongoing damage to my fence and indicated Mr. Henderson, suspected it might be her car. Her eyes darkened. She shot. "Are you accusing me?" I clarified that I was merely attempting to find out what was happening, not blaming. The damage was becoming typical. The tire tracks matched an SUV. She laughed dismissively. "There are sensors in my SUV. I never would smash through a fence. Perhaps your fence is simply overly close to the road or too fragile." For record purposes, it was not. It 3 feet inside my property border. I reminded her of it and also cautioned her about driving on someone's property in order to save a few seconds. She banged on the door squarely in my face. Pullness had fallen short. For evidence and fortification was time. I rebuilt the fence, strengthened the posts, and placed a covert surveillance camera pointed at that danger corner. 3 days later, bingo! Brenda's SUV was seen in full splendor in the video. Mounted the curb and sideswipes my fence like they were a speed bump. She showed no flinches at all. That was computed convenience, not recklessness. Stewing in moral outrage, I preserved the video. I then emailed the HOA, included the video, and urged them to discuss honoring property boundaries with Brenda. She knew I meant business, since I too followed her in too much detail. Her response was regular. She charged me with harassment and said the video was clearly doctored. The answer from the HOA is old-fashioned bureaucratic hand-washing. We call for mediation. Mediation with someone rejecting video evidence? Exactly. The next time it happened, I ignored emails. The game on. See, I am a structural engineer, not your typical suburbanite. Brenda had chosen a poor opponent. She insisted on a war over a fence. She would never forget the fortress I would assign her. She would ram the fence once more every couple weeks like clockwork. Every time, I rebuilt it stronger, more precisely recorded every effect. The HOA stayed useless, recommending thorny bushes, like if shrubbery could stop a suburban tank on wheels. While most of my neighbors just shook their heads, some understood. Let it go, they declared. Not me, though, neither. This was not about a fence now. It was a fight of ideas, and really, it was turning into a light-hearted little tactical game. Brenda represented the blitzkrieg, while my fence was the Maginot Line. Time for a major escalation was here. It came to me when I went over her most recent hit and run. She exuded great confidence and arrogance. She obviously thought my fence was only a stopgap on her usual route. But if that wasn't the case, suppose it appeared to be the same flimsy picket fence, but was something else? My engineer brain started to operate. I made calculations, drew designs, and started to create what I dubbed the final solution fence. The materials required to replicate would exactly yet resist significant impact. For the posts, I landed on hollow steel tube with steel plates as pickets, all textured and painted to pass as wood from any angle. I carried my ideas to a nearby fabricator, a tough but talented man called S. Rising an eyebrow, he examined my layout and inquired, "Planning to keep out a rogue elephant?" Laughing, I said something like, "Let's just say I have a persistent pest problem, and the usual deterrents aren't cutting it." He squatted in reply, "Heard that before. Some people simply do not respect limitations." He then offered me a sum that was not negligible, but by then I saw it as an investment in my peace of mind, and quite honestly, some long overdue justice. "Want it painted to match?" he inquired. "Perfectly," I said. "I want it to be exactly like the inexpensive pine I have been substituting every other week." He said, "Consider it done." Grinning, "This is not going to move. Whatever lands on this barrier will know about it." That was exactly the intended course of action. I had another important task to take care of while he started building the parts. The foundation. Only as strong as its grounding is a steel fence. To put it bluntly, for a normal picket fence, 3 feet deep and a foot in diameter each, I rented a motorized auger and dug post holes that were, to say it gently, excessive. There was to be high-strength concrete, filling every hole. I also intended to run a continuous concrete base, strengthened with rebar under the part Brenda most often targeted. This was meant to be a defensive installation, not merely a barrier. My weekends became a frenzy of subdued, deliberate effort, trying to make it rather low-key. I worked on the concrete and digging in stages. Mr. Henderson amusedly watched from his porch, putting in a new fence again. He made calls over one Saturday. "You're a relentless fella, Mr. H. This one will be a bit different," I said, smiling, a touch more convincing. He nodded slowly and just smoked on his pipe. He was beginning to see that something more than a basic fix was under process. Seeing enough of Brenda's pranks, he most likely kept a subdued hope for her comeuppance. Of course, the most crucial element was making sure the new reinforced portion matched the already existing, exactly normal wooden fence running across my entire property line. It had to seem like one continuous, vulnerable length. Brenda always cut a precise 10-foot stretch right at the apex of the curve, her favorite impact zone. That part would become the fortress fence, while the remainder stayed ordinary wood, a blank front. It was beautiful in the dishonesty. Brenda would approach hoping for the customary soft give and the pleasing crunch of splintering wood. She would discover instead an immovable object. I carefully evaluated the current pickets, their spacing, the rail height, and the steel components my fabricator was producing would precisely match these measurements. The paint matched the white of the rest of the fence, somewhat aged customistically. Once the new portion was put in place, I even intended to slightly damage the paint to give it an appearance as though it had been there for some time, weather-wise. Not one detail was too minor. Now upgraded to a higher resolution model with improved night vision, my security camera was exactly placed to record the whole spectacular occurrence. For redundancy, I even placed a secondary camera from another angle. I was walking away, leaving nothing to chance. The excitement was growing. It was like organizing a sophisticated, absolutely legal, completely justified prank, the kind that finishes with a thud that satisfies. A few weeks later, S called. "Your specially designed fence sections are ready, son." I drove across to his workshop. The made-from scratch steel parts were amazing. 1/8-inch thick steel plates welded tightly to 2-inch square steel tube rails made up the pickets. Painted a beautiful, simple white, the 4-inch square steel tubes used in the posts had a 1/4-inch wall thickness. Though they appeared to be wood, the weight of one I picked revealed a different picture. This was business of a serious nature. S gave me a shoulder tap. "Whatever you are planning, good luck. And send me a video if it's interesting." I gave him my word that I would. Installation ran a full weekend. From Brenda's customary zone, I pulled out the old weathered wooden supports and panels. Then, working hard, I moved the new steel posts into their deep, concrete-lined pits. Every post was set in piped, precisely set, high-strength concrete. Hard and unforgiving. The steel panels were fastened to the poles using hardened steel bolts. Just in case Brenda developed ideas about disassembly later, I used tamper-resistant bolt heads. When it was finished, I'd back off to appreciate my effort. It resembled the classic, innocent white picket fence of the past exactly. But I understood that 10-foot section was now just a low-profile steel barrier. To give the paint an aged and understated appearance, I even lightly scuffed it with some sandpaper and applied some artistic smudges of dirt. It was a masterwork of negative compliance. I had just to wait now. Like fishing, but instead of a trout, I was angling for a 2-ton SUV driven by an entitlement menace. The waiting was not too long. Brenda's daily schedule was set in stone. Usually between 5:30 and 6 p.m., she shortcuts the corner on her way home from work. On Tuesday, the third day Fortress fence was put in place. I was in my kitchen presumably preparing supper, but actually listening for the familiar rumbling of her SUV. On my tablet, I had the security camera live feed. She was the Black Rhino, speeding down the street with her blinker blatantly off, as usual at 5:47 p.m. She came up to the corner. I inhaled, my pulse throbbing somewhat quicker. This was the instant of truth. She did not hesitate at all. The SUV made its usual haughty sweep toward my house line, aiming for her normal place, the exact middle of my recently reinforced portion. The front passenger tire hopped the curb. Grinning broadly, I moved closer to the iPad. This was going to be rather lovely. The effect was not the splintering crunch to which I had been used. Rather, it was a slow metallic thud, then a terrible grinding and squealing sounds. From the camera feed, Brenda's SUV lucked violently to stop. Its front end clearly smashed into my immaculate, unbreakable white barrier. Not 1 inch, not a quiver. The fence itself did not move. There it stood calmly, mockingly, as if to ask, "Is that all you have?" Brenda's head jumped forward, then back. I thought her costly latte most likely recovered her dashboard. There was calm for a magnificent few seconds. Then the SUV's horn began to blaring. A continuous, agonizing shriek like the car itself was protesting the unfairness of running into an object that refused to give way. Brenda almost fell out clutching her head when the driver's side door swung open. Her face was a mask of incredulity and fierce anger even on the poor tablet image. She looked at her wrecked car, first then at my fence, then back to her car. She seemed incapable of understanding what had just transpired. Her once sleek, haughty SUV now had a very clear, very costly-looking front wing ding. The bumper hung off at a drunken angle, and the headlight broke. But my fence looked like it was ready for a picture session in Better Homes and Gardens. Not one scratch or smudge apart from the ones I had carefully applied myself. Brenda began shouting, a high-pitched, nonsensical scream of rage. She kicked her own tire, and I assumed merely damage to her foot. Then she started looking at my fence. She marched over, seized one of the pickets, and tried to shake it. Of course, it was not moving. Made of strong steel, it grounded in hundreds of pounds of concrete. She could as well have been attempting to upend the earth's underpinnings. Her expression twisted. She stared completely unhinged. Of course, I saved every beautiful second of the footage. Drawn by the noise, Mr. Place Fixed and Mr. Henderson had come out onto their porches. Watching with a leisurely smile on his face, he was pipe in hand. Other neighbors started looking through their windows. Brenda was now walking back and forth, gesturing frantically and still screaming, without looking at her audience. She was obviously beyond enraged, even though I couldn't make out the words from inside my house. She then grabbed out her phone and, I assumed, phoned the police, probably to report her aggressive, car-attacking fence. Exactly what I expected. I coolly grabbed my own phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. Yes, I would like to report a single vehicle accident on my property. I responded, my voice a model of cool concern. A vehicle strikes my fence looking to have lost control. She seemed somewhat agitated but unhurt. 10 minutes or so later the police showed up. Brenda, now red-faced and almost vibrating with anger, approached two cops, pointing a quivering finger first at her battered SUV and then at my austere, innocent-looking fence. I walked out, looking like a worried housekeeper. "Officers, thank you for coming," I remarked softly. "Is everything all good?" I listened for a big crash. Brenda spun on my behalf. You are to blame here. Your foolish fence is like some sort of death trap." Looking from Brenda to me, then to the fence, Officer Miller, as his name tag read, finally turned to the precisely defined tire tracks extending straight from the road, over the curb, across my yard, and terminating sharply at the point of impact on the fence. Officer Davis gave Brenda's SUV's front a professionally dubious look. Officer Miller remarked, his voice cool but forceful, "Ma'am, it appears you drove your vehicle off the roadway and onto private property, colliding with this gentleman's fence." Brenda screamed. "He did something to it." "Never done anything like this before. I hardly made contact with it. It's strengthened indeed. It's a riddle." I arched an eyebrow. "A riddle, ma'am? On my land, this fence is where it should be. Maybe this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been using my yard for driving." Turning to me, Officer Miller said, "Sir, has this been an ongoing issue?" "Sadly, yes, officer," I said. "Let me check my records. This is, I believe, the 7th time a vehicle cutting the corner in the past few months has knocked down this particular section of my fence." I said I have a lot of video footage of past events, including numerous clear clips showing the same car damaging things. I chose to strengthen this section of the fence following the last several repairs. I constructed it stronger since it had become far too costly to keep substituting standard wood. I took sure to underline that it was a reinforced fence, not some indestructible steel barrier meant to punish careless SUV drivers. Brenda sputtered, red-faced and fluttered. "He admits it. He strengthened it purposely to ruin my automobile." After checking her SUV, Officer Davis at last joined the discussion. "Ma'am," he began, straightening up, "the main reason your car seems to be damaged is you hitting a stationary item off course. The fence's makeup is not important. Build strong fences on your own land. Homeowners are within their rights." Examining the fence more attentively, he said, "Looks like a regular picket fence to me. Still good, strong construction." I took care not to smile. "I appreciate it, officer. I am proud of the upkeep of my house." Brenda was almost foaming right out of the mouth. She insisted they arrest me. For what precisely, she was unable to tell. Perhaps for the malicious placement of private property, or the destruction of her SUV by fencing. Patient as usual, the cops told her multiple times she was the one at blame. They gathered my statement, grabbed her license and registration, and looked over the situation carefully. They followed the obvious tire traces demonstrating precisely how her SUV had drove across the curb and entered my land. One of them even inquired as to whether I wanted to file charges for property damage. I turned aside with a grin. "This time, officer, the fence looks to have held really nicely. I suppose Mrs. I feigned to look for her name. Brenda has probably learned her lesson. Her shine could have melted steel, or at least a standard wooden picket." The cops cited her for failing to keep control and for careless driving. Her crushed SUV needed to be hauled. Mr. Henderson gave me a subdued thumbs up from his porch as the tow truck pulled away her crumpled suburban war machine. Sweet, sweet triumph. Still, that was not the end, not even very near. As it happened, Brenda was not the kind to pick up lessons. She was the kind to commit herself twice. 1 week later, I was handed a lawsuit. She was suing me for claimed hidden hazard creation, vehicle damage, and get this, emotional suffering. The daring was breathtaking. Actually, When I received the summons, I laughed aloud. This is going to be enjoyable. My insurance company answered my first call. They were shockingly helpful once I described the circumstances and sent them the mound of video footage I had gathered over the months, plus the police report. So she routinely drove onto your property, damaged your fence multiple times, and then hit it again after you made it stronger. And now she's suing you. My claims adjuster Carol asked with a sarcastic grin. That's roughly its scale, I said. That's bold, she said. You could say that. The legal word is, I believe, chutzpah. Carol laughed. We will assign you a lawyer. With the data, this ought to be a really simple defense. People are another thing entirely, huh? They are, in fact, really important. Ms. Albright, the attorney they assigned me, was sharp, no nonsense, and thrilled with the wealth of material I sent her. Hours of video showing Brenda's SUV running demolition derby with my fence, receipts for every repair, footage of the last crash, police report pinning Brenda directly, and even a sworn statement from Mr. Henderson, eager to testify about Brenda's long-standing habit of using my lawn as a shortcut. With sparkling eyes, he continued, That woman needs a lesson in humility. And I am just the man to assist in delivery. Brenda's case was a master class in assigning responsibility. Her neat-looking attorney said that by making the strengthened fence look exactly like the weaker sections, I had lured her into a trap. He said I had a duty of care to make sure my barrier was consistently weak, or at least marked to alert gullible SUV drivers. It was humorous. Brenda was painted as a poor commuter who drayed slightly off-road and came against a hostile barrier. They even worked hard on the emotional damage claim, alleging anguish and public humiliation. Our argument is simple. I was very entitled to check my fence. She was the one who had frequently damaged private property by driving onto it. Particularly looking forward cross-examining Brenda was Ms. Albright. She said boldly, She will tie herself in knots. People like that always do. The strength of our case led the court to decide on a summary judgment hearing instead of a full trial, should the facts be clear. Brenda turned up for the day looking austere and self-conscious. Her attorney exuded arrogant assurance. I, on the other hand, relaxed. On my side, I had around 50 gigabytes of video proof. The truth. The law that Brenda's attorney first presented me as some sort of obsessed crazy man with a vengeance and a dangerously reinforced fence. Ms. Albright then took over and gently tore down their whole case. She ran a collage of video clips. Brenda's SUV crashes the barrier over and over, cutting the corner. Then, from 2 angles, slow-motion video depicting the last crash. Tire traces, grass, crash. Your Honor, Albright added, the plaintiff has a well-documented history of trespassing and property damage. After many tries to settle the issue amicably and multiple costly repairs, my client eventually put in place a sturdy fence on his own land. Here the only risk was the plaintiff's careless driving. She showed the cops the Henderson statement, police report, and all the receipts. Brenda then turned. Albright started gently. Mrs. Brenda, are you claiming you left the road and drove onto my client's lawn and were unaware? Brenda sniffed, saying, I may have slightly veered off. Slightly enough to do it routinely for months. Albright asked, pointing to the stopped compilation video. Brenda's face grew tight. I'm not sure the details exactly. That video is misleading. Well, yes, but if it's so easy to hit, he shouldn't have a fence there. At that, the judge also raised an eyebrow. Albright pressed. So you believe homeowners should clear obstacles from your shortcut, even if that shortcut is over private property? It was just a little shortcut. Brenda cried out. He is acting vindicatively. He fashioned some sort of metal death trap. Mrs. Brenda, a metal death trap? Albright inquired with a cold tongue. Or a legal fence constructed of sturdy materials you drove into? Brenda said nothing. The court slanted forward. Mrs. Brenda, we have video proof of you often driving onto this land and destroying a fence. You did this once again on the relevant day. Your car suffered damage since, for once, the fence stood strong. Why should Mr., my last name, pay for that? She stammered. Because he made it stronger without telling me. The courtroom remained silent. Her attorney also seemed to want to vanish. The judge let out a yawn. I have enough hearing now. The plaintiff's allegation that a strong, legal fence constitutes a hazard is utterly unfounded. The plaintiff is found by this court totally liable for the damage to her car. This case comes out as almost frivolous. My heart shot. Ms. Albright nodded. Case dismissed with prejudice. She could not thus sue me once more for the same offense. Then the judge included something exquisite. Given the obvious pattern of trespassing and damage, the court is willing to entertain a counterclaim. Ms. Albright arrived ready. Your Honor, we have indeed filed such a claim. $8.50 for previous repairs, plus court costs. Brenda seemed poised for a blowout. Her attorney appeared to want to be somewhere else. After looking over the facts, the judge nodded and decided. Counterclaim approved in whole. Mrs. Brenda, you will pay $850 plus court expenses. I really suggest you to choose another path of employment. Driving over lawns is against the law, as well as against what landowners find acceptable. She gave the gavel a hard knock. The most contented sound I have ever heard. The traffic court punished Brenda additionally for careless driving. Her insurer denied her claim also in light of the police report and recordings. She paid for her totaled SUV out of cash. What resulted? Wonderfully subdued. Brenda stopped sacrificing quality for shortcuts. Her SUV disappeared from the area. Temporarily. When she finally showed up, she drove like she was auditioning for a safety video, particularly close to my house. A local legend, my strong part of fence remained unbroken. Telling the tale made Mr. Henderson happy. His lad erected his fence out of pure iron determination, and Karen drove right ahead toward it. Bam! The HOA even wrote me a letter of apologies. Brenda's power on the board seemed to wane following her court loss. Still, the nicest thing about it is mental calm. There is no more vandalism now. Not fixes anymore. No more drama. With a well-built picket fence and some legal justice. Just me, my fortress fence, and the peaceful satisfaction even the fiercest Karen can be brought to heel. Tell me in the comments whether you have ever dealt with a neighbor like Brenda and how you managed it. I appreciate you seeing. I will see you in the future one.